Morning, everybody. I'm Louise, and this is Jessie. We're from Delib, and we've also accidentally dressed in the TICTeC colours. So Delib, if you don't know, we're a digital democracy platform. We help public sector organisations to engage with citizens, and we help the public to take part in decisions that affect their lives. First, I'm going to ask you, though, a question I'd like a show of hands. How do you feel when you hear that the government is going to run a consultation on something that you care about? Do you feel pleased? Yes, I finally get to have my say. Anyone feeling that? 3 or 4 people, good. That's always reassuring. Do you feel, oh no, no sound. Okay, well, what Brenda says is, you're joking, not another one. Or perhaps you feel you have to ignore the consultation because you simply don't have time to take part. Anyone feeling like that? Oh, okay. 1. Great. And of course, there are probably other options and feelings as well that we've not covered. But for those that don't know it, that gift that you didn't hear was of Brenda from Bristol, UK, and that was on hearing the news that another general election was being called. So for those of you from outside of the UK, we had quite a few in the space of about 6 years, plus a referendum. So it was quite a lot of opportunities to exercise our democratic rights. Now, I think it's fair to say that many of us here are democracy enthusiasts. Probably we think a bit more democracy is good, and so we might be non-representative of the wider public. So you'd expect, and of course I am making assumptions here, that if even we are sometimes feeling a bit burnt out by consultation, we might think it's a bit rubbish, or unable to find the time to take part, that this might be true of everybody. And yet, consultation and forms of engagement like it remain one of the most frequent and most widely used ways of enacting democratic processes on a day-to-day basis. It is the closest that many people can get to giving their views to shape decision-making, and for that reason, we believe that these forms of engagement can and should be done well. And we know that when they're done well, they do make a difference. So we're here today to try to cover 3 things. 1, that we can do these things really well, people do, and the results are there to see, but perhaps not widely known. 2, we'd like to give you some examples of that in practice, where these activities and people's responses have directly influenced what happens next. And 3, to try to share something about what's needed to do a good job, which I think many of us in this room already know. Before we get into the examples, we should note that we're talking mostly about consultation, online consultation, and other online deliberative methods. There are other mechanisms for opening up day-to-day democracy to people, and all of these form part of the melting pot in ways that we can more regularly and thoughtfully hear the voices of those whose lives may be impacted by the changes made by government. Excuse me, I moved to notes. We also want to acknowledge that consultation and engagement is imperfect. There are constraints upon public sector organisations and certainly upon people responding. The advent of digital tools has made 10 million and more responses possible over a fairly short amount of time, and online consultation and deliberative methods have genuinely opened things up to many more people, but they haven't fixed democracy and made everything equitable and easy. But our job today is to try to give you a little bit of warmth, some reasons to be cheerful, stories of what's working, and the everyday efforts that help shape better policy, stronger communities, and more open government. So while we do want to be realistic and pragmatic, acknowledging the constraints and the difficulties, we think it's worth celebrating the good for about 20 minutes. And that's what we're going to do, and hopefully have you coming away feeling more enthused and less, not another consultation.
Over the past decade, more than 10 million responses have been collected through over 100,000 consultation and engagement activities on the platform that we provide. And that's what we can speak to. We've been doing this work for over 20 years, so there's not much we haven't seen or supported. While we can't speak for other providers, we know there are many organisations using other platforms and a great deal of activity happening across the board. What we do know is this: our platforms have been used by over 600 government organisations to open up democratic processes to broader and more diverse audiences. These platforms enable people to take part online and through other channels, helping to make public decision-making more inclusive and transparent. Because of our close work with governments across the UK, EU, Australia and New Zealand, from local councils to central and federal bodies, we get a unique aggregated view of how engagement happens across different contexts, We see the patterns, the innovations, we certainly see the challenges, we see what's working, and we see where things get stuck or don't work so well. What we've got here are the numbers of responses that have been collected via our platform each year. Individually, they represent something really important. That column from last year, for example, represents over 1.2 million times an individual had their voice heard about a subject they cared about. That might be a change to the nation's laws or the layout of their child's favourite play park. At a time when people's faith in democracy is eroding day by day, that really, really matters. This is a flavour of some of the larger national and high-profile things our customers have worked on over the years. These projects have definitely considerably contributed to that 10 million figure, but there is so much more to say. That is not the whole story. There is a whole heap of work that goes on at a local level all day, every day, which is just as important. It's about getting people involved in decisions being made about the neighbourhood and the area they live in. School admissions, public space protection orders, electric vehicle charging, and so much more. What we're showing here is that this work happens everywhere and at every scale, local and national. Now, we would love to stand up here and talk to you all day about all the great things our public sector colleagues have worked on with us, but we really can't do that in 20 minutes. We did try. So we've picked out some examples to share with you in a bit more detail.
So that's all right. So this first example is from the Scottish Government. It's the COVID Framework for Decision Making. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the Scottish Government launched a framework for decision making. This was an evolving plan for moving beyond lockdown, and one in which they wished to involve the people of Scotland. This quote on the slide is from Nicola Sturgeon in the introduction to that plan. This was not a consultation, but a different deliberative initiative to try to bring people into the process of solving the challenge collaboratively. It also became a window into the lives of people living in Scotland in lockdown during a pandemic. It showed the reality of that scenario for many people, the pressures being faced, and the human needs that were left unmet. The Scottish Government asked people about how lockdown affected them. They asked what their priorities would be if the lockdown was eased. For example, the reopening of businesses, when their children should be allowed back to school, when they could visit relatives again. It was deeply personal, and by being so close to people's needs and wants, the challenge was relevant to pretty much everyone in Scotland. This conversation was open for 1 week and received 4,000 ideas and about 18,000 comments, with site visits into the millions. The Scottish Government team put a huge amount of effort into promotion, moderation, analysis, and ongoing communication, which made this a real success. Working openly and genuinely seeking public views has been central to this team's culture for all the time we have worked with them. This was a huge commitment, and they have a huge commitment to doing it well, and a deeply experienced and human-focused team. The outcome of this national conversation was that the ideas that people put forward and the detailed conversation between people on the various topics directly helped to shape the route map out of lockdown. It influenced what opened up and when that happened. Ministers were briefed on what was coming out in that discussion daily, and these ideas were being heard right in the heart of government. The quality and care in the responses was extremely clear. It was a true testament to the people of Scotland. People spoke with emotion and honesty about their own needs and wants, but also of protecting the more vulnerable and of protecting society as a whole. It also gave people a voice and connection to one another and the opportunity to exert some power at a time of crisis, separation, and fear. This next example is from the Police Service of Northern Ireland. As many of us know, the relationship between police forces and citizens needs constant nurturing. People's fundamental sense of safety depends on it, but that trust is not easily won, nor is it easily sustained. In Northern Ireland, the paramilitary activity during the Troubles has been a dominant part of the policing landscape. However, the demands on the force have shifted from managing violent conflict to a different set of cases, so rises in cybercrime, sexual exploitation, and other types of cases that are more complex, cross-border, and highly intensive to investigate. And they had to do all that while managing a significant drop in budget. In this environment, building trust and open communication with communities is vital. PSNI has embedded a culture with this at its core. 5 years ago, they opened up their policing priorities to the public, and over 4,000 people responded. This exercise was run on Simulator, which allowed them to give people 100 points to spend on where they wanted to see the service direct their efforts. But importantly, each option was accompanied by what delivering on that priority would mean in practice and the payoffs that they'd have to make. What that resulted in was the next priorities for the next 5 years of policing were determined by the people, and people became more informed about the changing demands on the police service. They identified 6 areas of most concern, and this led to visible changes, meaning people could see the direct outcomes of their involvement. These are things like an investment in having mental health practitioners as the first point of contact for vulnerable callers, putting in support hubs across policing districts, increasing the number of officers in neighbourhood policing, introducing schools officers in every district, and increasing the number of single officer patrols, among many other things. We're going to come back to this again in the next section, but where there is an organisational culture which is more humble and genuinely believes that when informed and included, people using a service can more effectively shape your priorities, then this in turn enables your organisation to deliver genuinely actionable outcomes with buy-in. If you trust people, they are more likely to trust you, and obviously in the environment of policing, that's the lifeblood.
Our third and final example is from fire and emergency in New Zealand, which I'm going to refer to as FENZ while I'm up here, otherwise I'll use up the rest of the 20 minutes. So FENZ was formed to create a unified national fire and emergency service capable of responding to a real broad range of emergencies, not just fires, also floods, vehicle crashes, hazardous leaks or spills, and rescues. And they are funded almost entirely by levies paid on vehicle and property insurance policies. So this one does mean talking about insurance, so I'm going to ask you to bear with me because I promise you it's interesting. It's a real example of high-level policy changes that could have a huge impact for many, many people across New Zealand. If a person pays for any eligible property or car insurance premium, they pay towards this levy. So this impacts a huge proportion of people across the country, both their finances, but also their safety. This organisation was set up to keep people safe, and they need to be properly funded in order to do that. The levy settings are reviewed every 3 years, and there has been ongoing public consultation due to concerns about fairness and scope. Concerns have previously been raised by both individuals around the equity of those with insurance pay, while uninsured individuals benefit from the same services but without contributing, and also from insurance businesses and organisations who have the administrative burden of collecting these levies. Delib supported FENZ in 2024 to run their most recent levy consultation, covering the years 2026 to 2029. And the proposals put forward were looking at introducing an overall 5.2% increase to the levy. This time around, FENZ used an online platform, but one of the first lessons when it comes to running successful consultation is that you can't build it and expect people to come. You have to go to your audience. So they published a public notice in 96 print publications nationally. They issued a media release to the national media. They ran a public information campaign and billboard networks. They broadcast an advertisement on radio stations, and they emailed more than 300 of their stakeholders twice during the consultation period. Through a dedicated approach to reaching their audience through design and promotion and using an online platform, they increased their response numbers by 188%. The priorities of the public were overwhelmingly clear, and FENZ changed the increase to 2.2% from the original 5.2%. They did this by introducing tiers across the different rates of insurance and types of property, but most importantly, mitigating that financial impact on households and businesses, paying those levy costs across the country, while also ensuring they have appropriate funding to continue to keep people safe.
So we chose these 3 out of the many that we could talk about. There are some others that are on screen. We chose them because they had immediate outcomes from the input made by respondents. However, there are real long-term impacts from people's input which are harder to neatly sum up. A lot of policy deals with multi-decade change. In the UK, the Department of Health ran multiple consultations on tobacco packaging. The first of these was over a decade ago, and this generated hundreds of thousands of responses from the tobacco industry, health groups, and the public. We now have plain tobacco packaging in the UK, and the consultation was not a referendum on yes or no should we have it. It was there to shape the structure of whether and how it happened. So it dealt with things like the font and the colour of the packaging and the speed at which these changes could realistically be implemented. There are now metrics coming out about a decline in smoking, but it will be years more before we learn what impact this may have on things like lung cancer rates. So there are direct same-year influences we can make as citizens, but also our views and how we shape policy to make it actionable has a much longer tail too, with the potential to change lives now and way into the future.
And now we're on to the final point, the last and final point we wanted to talk about, which is what good looks like. This is not an exhaustive list or a playbook, and as a room full of like-minded people, I'm sure you all know this already. I was in a very interesting workshop that happened yesterday, and one of the questions that we were asked was, what would your ask of government be? And some of those asks were very fundamental and basic. So this is really a recap on some of that. What I really want to do here is reiterate those kind of basic and fundamental things, because we have all talked about, I've heard talks, I've heard individual conversations, been a part of them, been to talks, about how we can mend the relationship with those who govern and those who are governed, and asking for these things to be done consistently, and I think that's the key word, to be consistently done, really helps us to do this.
So, of course, we always wish every organisation was willing to genuinely seek views and be open and to give their teams the time, space and backing to doing this well. But the reality is that this is not always the case. So we have to recognise that it can be hard for dedicated public servants to do this if organisational leadership is not willing to strive for a respondent-first approach or there isn't the funding. However, even in a more lockdown culture, there are some things which could be done by teams who want to do this well. And using things like in the UK, the gunning principles, which are the minimum standards for statutory consultation, and using things like accessibility laws can give teams some leverage to push for better outcomes for themselves and for respondents. It doesn't have to take a huge amount of time to make things a little bit better. And if teams can show that by being open, we've heard this in lots of talks, designing with users in mind and planning for outcomes, that they get a better response and create a better relationship with those they serve, this has the potential to prove that there's value in doing this, the what's in it for me factor. Because consultation categorically does not have to be a bureaucratic, wordy type of thing. It can be something that's vibrant and informative and inclusive and accessible. And above all else, it can come out with some really actionable outcomes that make things better for everyone.
If we're making decisions that affect the public, then the public needs to be a part of shaping them. And that means all part of the public. Making consultations inclusive and accessible isn't just a nice to have, as we all know. It's essential for fair, effective decision making. If we only hear from the usual voices, we miss out on vital perspectives. That's why it's so important to design with accessibility in mind from the start, and to user test with people who are actually going to use this, so we know it actually works for the people we're trying to reach. When we make the effort to involve those who are often excluded, whether due to language, disability, digital barriers or time, we don't just get better data, but we build trust and more representative decisions. And closing that feedback loop, when people take the time to respond to a consultation, they're doing something really important. They're engaging with democracy. They're sharing their experiences and helping shape decisions that affect their lives. But if they never hear back, it can feel like shouting into a void. Providing feedback, even just to say what was heard, what's happening next, or why something can or can't change, closes that loop. It builds trust, shows respect, and encourages people to take part again in the future. Without it, engagement becomes a one-way street, and with it, consultation becomes a conversation, and that's where the real progress starts. It isn't always easy to feedback. Sometimes an organisation has consulted, and then things change, a change in power or leadership, which means they need to make an about turn. But honest and transparent feedback keeps people feeling informed, and I don't know about anyone else, but I find it much easier to accept a situational decision when I understand why and that story is shared. and planning for outcomes, and not just in terms of collecting responses, but in terms of the real world change or decision we want to inform. It helps shift the focus from just running an activity to understanding its purpose. Are we shaping a policy, improving a service, testing a proposal, or just building relationships and trust? Once you know the outcome you're aiming for, you can design everything else. The questions, the audience, the methods, the timing to support that goal. It also means you'll know what success looks like, and you'll be better placed to report back, evaluate, and act on what you've heard. In short, it keeps consultation meaningful, intentional, and connected to real decisions, and not just a box-ticking exercise.
So to recap and sum up, it's got to be accessible and inclusive. We need to design with users in mind. We can make things vibrant, informative, and easier. We need to close the feedback loop, be honest and transparent, or at the very least say something about it. And we need to plan from outcomes, make it intentional. Why are we doing this? Let it not be a box-ticking exercise. That's all we have time for. I'm sorry we've gone on quite a long time. So we wanted to leave you with what it means to be heard from just one of the 10 million people we've been speaking about. This is a quote from someone who participated in a lovely budgeting exercise for Fife Council in Scotland. And they said, I really like the fact that people like me can be a part of this. I have opinions and use services, but this is the first time I've been asked what I think. Let's make sure we give many more people that feeling. Thank you. Thanks.